Briggs is our marketing analyst this week. The latest Sterling beef profit tracker for the week ending Saturday, September 22nd, showed the average feed yard lost just over $45 a head, with the packers deficit over $51.50 per head. But as harvest races along in Nebraska, we started by asking Mike about the yields coming in and how those numbers could affect grain prices.
What I understand is, I'm not much of a farmer, but from what I understand talking to my relatives, yields are really variable. There's corn anywhere as high as 280, I've heard, all the way down to 0. Not a lot of zeros in our area, and in fact, most cases, the corn's been better than a lot of people thought, especially when you're talking about mid 200s on irrigated corn. That's really good. The beans have been really variable, but I don't think harvest is quite as disastrous as people once thought, and I think that's kind of the way it is all over the country. So hopefully we won't see our crops get any smaller.
For a few reasons, we've seen a pullback in the grain markets this week.
Yeah.
Any confidence that there's a bit of a lid on it now?
I don't know if there's a lid. You're in the middle of harvest. Guys are selling a lot of grain off the, right off the grain cart. They're going to sell that stuff. When harvest is over, though, there's plenty of storage, and I think if the price is below a certain level, the farmer's going to tell you to go pound sand, and that's going to stop the leaking of this corn. And then the other thing is the funds. The funds have decided they want to be out, but it's harvest, folks, and corn goes down in harvest most of the time.
And you think there are going to be a lot of acres in 2013, if I remember correctly?
I do. My big statement is acres from here to Christmas, and I still believe that, because it's still more profitable. Now, if the bean thing doesn't cool off, which it's cooled off quite considerably, that corn-bean ratio is always a player in that.
So do you think there's a window to buy corn here, or would you wait?
I think no. Somewhere here in the next 10 days, we're going to get, once you get past about 60 or 70% of harvest, that's pretty much the end of it. And I think somewhere here in the next 10 days, you probably better get some of your needs covered. Now, it's up to you if you want to go clear through the end of the year or what you think you want to do. I think we're going to get quite a bit of corn around us as we can, because I don't think it's going to go a lot lower from here. I'm not going to say it's going to 950 or anything stupid like that, but I don't see it going a lot lower, because once the combines are done, the corn supply is going to get real tight.
Good. I don't see you as a sky is falling type of guy, Mike.
No.
Let's talk about the cattle on feed report. Across the nation, I believe down 1%, but in Nebraska up 11%. Diagnosis there?
Well, we've got the ability. That's the one nice thing about ethanol plants, is we have ethanol byproduct to feed. That cheapens our rations down, helps our performance. So it gives us a little bit of the edge over the guys in the south. They're having to pay huge basis levels for corn. So we're buying our corn cheaper to start with. Then we have that ethanol byproducts to throw in there. It gives us a little bit of a competitive advantage. That's, I think, the placement issue. You've seen, ever since ethanol started, you've seen a migration of the feeding industry to the north. Iowa was the #1 cattle feeding state long time ago. They went down to next to nothing. Now they're right back up there in these numbers, and that's all from ethanol byproduct.
So that being said, are the margins being helped by that at all, or is it still a loser?
Cattle are still a loser. They talk about, about beef supply. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Beef supply has not waned very much in comparison to the amount of slaughter numbers that have gone down. It's because the cattle are so big. And a lot of that just goes to what we have for genetics now and what we're able to do here. And the other thing is, you talked about the cattle on feed. People are feeding cattle longer. They're feeding them to their genetic potential because the swap is so bad. I'm not going to sell an animal that's in my feed yard so I can go buy an animal that loses $100 a head.
When you look at production over the next 6 months to a year, and then that compared with supply, does lower production and lower supply equal lower consumption?
Great question.
Thank you.
I don't think so.
I appreciate that.
I don't think so. It's a supply and demand issue. It always will be, but beef has a place in the American diet, and it's having a growing place in the world diet. So I think there's a lot of different things there. I think beef is going to stay fairly competitive. You've got a hog issue right now. Mm-hmm. Once that hog issue is through, so that hog or pork isn't so dramatically cheaper than beef, where it all levels up, you're going to come into a time here where we're going to have really short supplies of protein and not be able to do a lot about it. And so it's just going to get forced higher just because of that, just because of minimal supply.
Quickly on the packers, they were above 0 for a little bit, and now they seem to be back below. For how long?
They may struggle for the rest of the year. I don't know. I've contended that we were going to get short cattle now. You've seen slaughter numbers drop, and I think that's an availability issue. That's not just an issue where they don't want to slaughter them. I think you've seen slaughter drop. I think you could see it drop through the end of the year. The interesting thing is going to be, and you kind of saw it in the last cattle on feed, a lot of people were assuming all these drought calves came in and boy, we're just going to have an ocean of cattle right after the first of the year. And that's not what the cattle on feed report showed. So maybe these supplies will be a little more gradual and we never have the dreaded wall of cattle. I don't think it's there. I think if Packers can't force beef dramatically higher, I think they're going to struggle because there's way too many hooks out there. There probably needs to be a packing plant closed somewhere so they have a little bit better handle on the inventory.